Every single second of your life, there's this incredible delivery service running inside of you. It's busy transporting oxygen, nutrients, and all sorts of messages to trillions of cells, and you don't even have to think about it. It's amazing. So today, we're going to pull back the curtain and see exactly how this incredible network operates.
I mean, really think about it. Whether you're sleeping or working or just watching this, your heart is just pumping away nonstop. It makes sure every single part of you gets exactly what it needs to survive. So how on earth does it manage this incredible, life-sustaining job? Well, let's find out.
All right, let's get into it. Here's what we're going to cover. First up, we'll talk about why we even need this transport system in the first place. Then, we'll get into the super clever two-circuit design of our circulation. After that, we'll trace the exact path blood takes to the heart and figure out how it keeps that steady beat. We'll also check out the different kinds of blood vessels, the highways and the back roads, if you will. And finally, we'll look at blood itself and, what happens when things go wrong.
So, first things first, you might be wondering, why can't our bodies just, soak up what we need from the air or our food directly? Why do we need this whole complicated internal plumbing system anyway?
Well, the answer really boils down to size and distance. Think about a tiny, single-celled organism, like an amoeba. It can get everything it needs through a simple process called diffusion, mainly because every part of it is super close to the outside world. But for us, a big, complex human, most of our cells are buried deep, deep inside. Just imagine trying to get oxygen from your lungs all the way down to the muscles in your big toe using just diffusion. It would take forever. It would be way, way too slow. So we need something much faster, a super efficient, high-speed delivery service.
And that's where the circulatory system comes in. It's basically made up of three key parts. You've got the heart, which is like the powerful engine or pump that drives the whole operation. Then you've got the blood vessels, this huge network of tubes that are like the highways and roads. And finally, you have the blood itself. That's the delivery truck, the fluid that's actually carrying all that precious cargo.
Okay, now here's where things get really clever. The human circulatory system isn't just one giant loop. Nope, it's actually two separate, interconnected circuits that work in perfect harmony. And this setup gives us a huge evolutionary advantage. Let's take a closer look at what we call double circulation. This picture here shows the two loops perfectly. Okay, so on one side, you've got the pulmonary circuit. That's the loop that sends blood from the heart over to the lungs and then right back to the heart. Its one and only job is to get that blood loaded up with oxygen. Then you've got the systemic circuit. This is the big one. It takes that fresh, oxygen-rich blood and pumps it out to the entire rest of your body, your brain, your muscles, everything, before it comes back to the heart.
So, why the two circuits? Why not just one? Well, it all comes down to one crucial thing: pressure. The trip to the lungs and back is really short, right? So the pulmonary circuit can work at a nice low pressure. That's really important because the tissues in our lungs are super delicate. But to get blood all the way up to your brain and down to your toes, that requires some serious force. So the systemic circuit has to be under much higher pressure. This whole dual system is just brilliant. It lets us be gentle where we need to be, in the lungs, but powerful enough to supply the rest of the body. It's the best of both worlds.
All right, now let's zoom right in on the engine of this whole system, the heart. We're going to go on a little tour and follow a single drop of blood on its complete journey through the four chambers of this absolutely incredible organ.
So here we are, a look inside. The heart is split into four distinct chambers. See those two at the top? Those are the right and left atria. Think of them as the receiving rooms. They collect the blood as it comes back to the heart. And underneath them, you've got the real powerhouses, the right and left ventricles. These are the main pumping chambers. Oh, and see that thick wall of muscle right down the middle? That's called the septum. And it is absolutely vital because it acts as a barrier, keeping the oxygen-poor blood on the right side totally separate from the oxygen-rich blood on the left.
Okay, you ready? Let's trace the path. So, deoxygenated blood, that's blood that's already delivered its oxygen, comes back from the body, and enters the right atrium. From there, it gets pushed down into the right ventricle. Next, the right ventricle gives a big squeeze and pumps that deoxygenated blood out through the pulmonary artery, straight to the lungs. Now, in the lungs, it's like a pit stop. It drops off its waste carbon dioxide and picks up a fresh load of oxygen. Now it's bright red and oxygen-rich, and it heads back to the heart, this time entering the left atrium. It then flows down into the left ventricle. And remember how we said the left side is more powerful? You can see how much thicker the muscle wall is here. This chamber contracts with huge force,
pumping that oxygenated blood out through the main artery, the aorta, to get sent out to the entire body. And then the whole cycle starts all over again.
Wow.
But wait a minute. When the heart pumps with all that force, what stops the blood from just flowing backward? Well, that's the genius of the heart valves. They're basically perfect one-way doors. You have the atrioventricular valves between the atria and the ventricles, and then the semilunar valves at the exit of each ventricle. So when the ventricles squeeze to pump blood out, the atrioventricular valves slam shut. That's the lub sound you hear. Then when the ventricles relax to refill, the semilunar valves snap shut to stop blood from flowing back in, and that's the dub sound. So that lub-dub of your heartbeat, it's literally the sound of those valve doors opening and closing in perfect time. Your heart beats something like 100,000 times a day, and you don't have to think about a single one of them. It's just automatic. So what's controlling this constant rhythmic beat, and how can we actually monitor what it's doing?
Well, what's really cool is that the heart has its own built-in control system. The whole thing is kicked off by a tiny group of special cells in the right atrium called the pacemaker. It sends out a regular little electrical spark, an impulse that tells the heart muscle, okay, time to contract. But your body can override this default setting. Your nervous system is always monitoring things like your blood pressure, and it can send a message to the pacemaker saying, hey, speed it up, or okay, let's slow it down. And then you have hormones. A shot of adrenaline, from that fight or flight response can totally supercharge your heart, making it beat way faster and a lot stronger.
And we can actually monitor this activity pretty easily ourselves. You've probably done this. When you check your pulse on your wrist, what you're feeling is the pressure wave from your heartbeat as blood surges through that artery. It's a direct count of your heart rate. Now, for a much more detailed picture, doctors use something called an electrocardiogram, or ECG. They place these little electrodes on your skin, and they can record the electrical signals from your pacemaker as they travel through the heart muscle. The pattern it creates, that famous spiky line, can tell them a ton about the health and rhythm of your heart. And this all makes perfect sense when you think about exercise, right? When you start running or working out, your muscles are working way harder. They need more energy. And to make that energy, they need more oxygen for a process called cellular respiration. Your brain picks up on this increased demand and basically sends a message to your heart, we need more speed. So your heart rate goes up, pumping blood much faster to get that vital oxygen to the muscles and, just as importantly, to clear out the waste products like carbon dioxide more quickly.
Okay, so we've covered the pump, the heart, but where does all that blood actually go? Well, it travels through this absolutely massive network of vessels. You can really think of it like a country's road system. It's got everything from huge multi-lane highways to tiny little side streets and alleys.
Let's break down the three main types of roads in this system. First, you have the arteries. These are the major highways carrying blood away from the heart. Because they're handling that high-pressure blast of blood straight from the pump, they need to be super tough, thick, muscular, and elastic. Then you've got the veins. These are the roads that bring the low-pressure blood back to the heart. Their walls are thinner and the tube itself is wider. And here's a key difference. Veins have these little one-way valves inside them to make sure the blood doesn't flow backward. And finally, we have the capillaries. These are the tiny, tiny little neighborhood streets. Their walls are incredibly thin, only one single cell thick. And that's because this is where the real action happens, where all the deliveries and pickups are made.
So this is the crucial point of exchange. Imagine the blood arriving in these tiny capillaries under pressure. Some of the liquid part of the blood, the plasma, actually gets squeezed out through the super thin capillary walls. This fluid is now called tissue fluid, and it basically bathes all the surrounding body cells. And it's here, in this fluid, that the grand exchange takes place. Oxygen and nutrients diffuse out of the fluid and into the cells that need them. At the same time, the cells dump their waste products, like carbon dioxide, into the fluid. Then, most of this tissue fluid gets reabsorbed back into the capillaries further down the line to be carried away.
Okay, so we've talked about the pump and all the pipes. But what about the stuff flowing through them, the blood itself? Let's take a look at what blood is actually made of, and also what can happen when the system runs into trouble, like an injury or a disease.
Blood is way more than just red liquid. It's a really complex mix. A little over half of it, about 55%, is plasma. That's the yellowish liquid part that carries all sorts of things like hormones, nutrients, and waste. Then, about 44% is made up of red blood cells. You can think of these as tiny little delivery trucks packed with a special protein called hemoglobin that grabs onto oxygen. And that tiny 1% that's left over, that's a mix of white blood cells, which are the soldiers of your immune system, and platelets, which are little cell fragments that are absolutely essential for making your blood clot.
So what happens when you get a cut? Well, an amazing emergency response kicks into gear. First, platelets rush to the scene of the injury. They become really sticky and clump together to form a temporary plug. This action triggers a whole cascade of chemical reactions in the plasma. The end goal is to convert a soluble protein called fibrinogen into an insoluble one called fibrin. And fibrin is the real hero here. It forms this net, like a tiny mesh of threads, that traps red blood cells and more platelets, creating a solid clot. This clot seals the wound, stops the bleeding, and lets the healing process begin. It's incredible.
But of course, problems can happen inside the system, and a really big one is coronary heart disease. Here's how it works. Fatty deposits, called atheroma, start to build up on the inside walls of your coronary arteries. Now, these are the super important arteries that supply the heart muscle itself with blood and oxygen. As these fatty plaques get bigger, they start to narrow the artery, kind of like gunk in a pipe, which restricts blood flow. This can lead to chest pain, especially during exercise, which is known as angina. But the real danger, the really scary part, is if a piece of that plaque breaks loose. Your body's clotting system sees this as an injury and forms a clot right there. If that clot is big enough to completely block the artery, a section of the heart muscle is starved of oxygen. And that right there is a heart attack. And as you can see, the biggest risk factors are things we hear about all the time. Smoking, a diet high in unhealthy fats, not getting enough exercise, and of course your family genetics play a role too.
So, as we wrap all this up, I want to leave you with one final thought. Your circulatory system, this whole network we've been talking about, is a closed loop. It literally connects every single cell in your body to every other cell. So when you think about it that way, a single lifestyle choice, like what you decide to eat for lunch or whether you decide to go for a run, it doesn't just affect your weight or your muscles, it impacts the entire system. And through that system, it affects the health of every organ, every tissue, and every cell you've got. It really is all connected.